Welcome to the Hair Loss Show. Dr. Russell Knudsen and Dr. Vikram Jayaprakash discuss issues relating to hair loss and the medical and surgical treatment of hair loss in both men and women.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the Hair Loss Show. My name is Dr. Vikram Jayaprakash.
I'm Dr. Russell Knudsen.
And welcome to episode number 10. I'm very excited about this episode. I really am.
This is the meat.
This is the one, actually, when we started talking about doing this was the one that I wanted to try and, this was one I was most excited about, because today's topic is hair transplant and where does it fit in the whole universe of hair restoration. And that's our thing. So yes, we love talking about medication and the medical side of things, but hair transplant surgery, that's what we're sort of geeking over right now.
Okay, so now people, we're going to talk about the surgical side of managing hair loss. So the thing to understand about the surgical side of hair loss is we're not trying to improve the quality of the hairs that are in the thinning area, we're trying to add hairs to the area. And that relies on a very curious phenomenon that isn't fully understood. And that is, for example, in male pattern baldness and in female pattern hair loss, why are the hairs in the lower scalp stronger for longer than the hairs in the upper scalp? And it's a curious question. We know that in men and sometimes in women, it's to do with the enzyme 5-alpha reductase and the amount of DHT being produced in the follicle. But it seems curious that a hormone like DHT that stimulates body hairs inhibits scalp hairs. And if scalp hairs are a unique population of hairs that respond poorly to DHT, why, mostly speaking, is the lower scalp staying healthier than the upper scalp?
Well, this is interesting because we were having a chat about this earlier on. And so my knowledge up to this point was that the hairs at the back of the scalp, they code for lower levels of the enzyme. They're genetically different. They code for lower levels of the enzyme compared to this. But you were telling me today that it's all due to embryology, how the body, when it's developing from an embryo, and this is really getting a bit too technical for this podcast.
Well, it's also brand new research,
yes.
And that is that you're correct that the hairs in the lower scalp are genetically different to the hairs in the upper scalp, but we didn't understand why until recently. We believe that, going back to embryology, that there are 3 different types of embryological cells that differentiate into all the cells of the body. And curiously, the hairs in the upper scalp come from a slightly different area to the hairs in the lower scalp. So I'm not going to get any more to it than that, but it is curious that that would be the case. So that does seem to help us explain why the hairs in the lower scalp are balding resistant or thinning resistant compared to the hairs in the upper scalp.
So what we're saying is that if you look at, for example, male pattern hair loss, what the hairs on this upper part of the scalp, the dome of the scalp, they are at risk of falling out. But if you look at someone who's lost a lot of hair, they will still maintain that rim of hair at the back of the head. And so using that differentiation of the hairs, how these hairs are different to that is what we use that principle when we're operating.
So in the 1950s, a New York dermatologist, and this is the Western story, not the Eastern story, because there is an Asian story that we won't get into tonight. But the Western story is that a dermatologist in the 1950s was experimenting with the idea of why hairs in the lower scalp would be strong and why hairs in the upper scalp would go bald. So what he did was a simple experiment. He used a dermatological punch, where people take these punch biopsies. He punched out some hair-bearing skin from the lower scalp. He punched out some balding skin from the upper scalp, and he swapped them. So he put the hairy skin into the bald skin. He put the bald skin back amongst the hairy skin. And the very interesting observation he made was that the hairs that came from the lower scalp into the bald skin in the upper scalp stayed hairy, and the bald skin from the upper scalp, when placed down into the hair-bearing skin, stayed bald. And he called this donor dominance. So in other words, whatever the characteristic of the donor skin that you use remains its characteristic when you transplant it to another region. So this became the Western version of hair transplantation. And this data was published in a relatively obscure medical journal in 1959, because nobody thought it was that interesting. But it turns out it was very interesting. But the problem with it was because it was developed as a punch biopsy technique using rather large punches, when people started to get excited about this and the patients were demanding it, the operations involved these large punches of 4.5 to 5 millimeter diameter punches with 15, 20, 25 hairs in them. And when you put them here and then here and here and here, it just looked like there was a plant growing here and a plant growing here and a tree growing here. And so even though it was a technical success, meaning that the hairs grew and stayed healthy, it was a cosmetic failure because it just wasn't a natural distribution of hairs. So there was, you had to be a very keen patient back in the 1960s, the 1970s, and even the early 1980s to want to have hair transplantation. And you had to be very careful about how you did your grooming because of the way the technique had developed.
And this gave that doll's look appearance, isn't it? Where you had rows of the clumps of hairs.
This is where the bad reputation for hair transplants came from, because of the technical style of the technique they were using at the time, which was producing this doll's head effect, if you like, and then it required careful grooming. It seems hard to believe, Vikram, but it wasn't until 1984 that work was published in a dermatology journal about how actually hair grew on the scalp, and that it grew in these follicular units that we've talked about before, which are these groups of hairs, usually 2, 3, 4 hairs at a time. And it wasn't then until the penny dropped to people in the hair transplant surgeons industry that maybe if we went towards using more natural groupings, we would get a better result. And the short answer is, over the next 10 years from the publication of that paper, the revolution occurred in hair transplant surgery from the mid-80s through to the early 90s, where microscopically controlled dissection down to the natural groupings of hair follicles that were then inserted in their natural groupings into the scalp completely changed the face of hair transplantation, to the extent that from the early 90s till now, which is 25 years, we've been able to do hair transplantation successfully and have patients walk down the street without anybody knowing they've had a hair transplant. So just to emphasize, this is our overview of hair transplantation. There are things that you need to understand about it. Firstly,
sorry, go on, that's all right.
You need to use your own hair.
That's right.
Okay, so basically the skin has a very strong immune system. So Vikram can't donate his beautiful hair to me, and I can't donate my old crappy grey hair to him, because his immune system and my immune system wouldn't allow it. So I often joke with patients who are very bald and don't have a very much amount of down hair. I ask them, do you happen to have an identical twin? Because it has been successfully performed that you can take an identical twin's hair and transplant it to the other twin. That will work, but only in that situation. Father-son, mother-daughter, mother-son, none of that works. Okay, your immune system is too strongly impacted around the skin, which is why burns, for example, you have to use your own skin. You can't use somebody else's skin. So we haven't got that synthetic skin that they're starting to use in burns now for hair transplantation, or synthetic hairs is a different story. But you have to use your own hair. So for many, and you can use it for anything, right? So the beauty of hair transplantation, and we'll discuss it in more detail in future podcasts, is that you can use it in baldness. You can use it in people who've lost hair because they had scars from surgical treatments. There is enough blood growth in a scar for the modern, minor, small, tiny graft, the follicular unit graft, to actually grow in the scar and grow successfully and normally in the scar. Sometimes the growth rate's a little bit less, but in healthy skin, we expect better than 90% of the hairs to take and grow if it's properly performed. So you can do it in scars. You can do it for burns scarring, which is a beautiful way to assist scalp hair, eyebrows, beards, sideburns. You can do all sorts of things. There are skin conditions that destroy hair that you can transplant as long as the skin condition's inactive. So there are many different versions. You can do it for patients who've had radiotherapy after a brain tumor, for example, where the radiotherapy has destroyed their hair follicles and they don't come back. And you can do it just for people who've got aging hair loss and it's a bit thin and they want to look a little bit thicker. So there's a variety of applications for hair transplantation, but it's true to say that more than 85% of the operations in the world are then done for male pattern baldness.
So just to summarize, if you're losing your hair, all right, we've talked about medication. The medication is designed ideally primarily to stop the loss of hair.
Yes.
Okay. You may get a little bit of thickening, but primarily the goal is to stop that progression of hair loss. And I always say to my patients, if you want more hair, all right, really the only way in a particular area, the only way of doing that is having a hair transplant. Okay. And a hair transplant in essence is moving hair from the back of the head, which is genetically different to the rest of the hair, to the area where you want it to grow. You are moving those hair follicles. They're genetically different. And we are moving the natural groupings of hairs, and it will grow because it's your own tissue and it picks up the blood supply. They're very hardy. And because we're moving the natural groupings, it should look natural. No one should pick that you've had a hair transplant if done properly.
And the other issue is it doesn't need any specific maintenance. So if you've actually transplanted these healthy hairs, once they're in and they're growing, there's nothing you need to do. You can leave them alone. You can style them, you can colour them. None of these things impact on the hair ability to grow. So you just treat them. It's like, I argue to patients, it's like taking a plant from the back garden and putting it in the front garden. Once it's there and it's healthy and growing, you don't treat it any differently than you did in the back garden. So that's the beauty of it. Where it fits into using in combination with medical therapy is that if you have a hair loss condition that might be progressive, whether it's to do with balding, for example, whether it's to do with due to iron deficiency or thyroid deficiency, and you have progressive hair loss, if you have skin conditions that have done it, then you need to do something to control those conditions if you're going to transplant. So you're not treating the transplanted hairs, you're treating the non-transplanted hairs that are at risk of future hair loss. So as a standalone therapy, it's great. Patients come in and say, oh, look, I don't want to do treatment for the rest of my life. All I really want to do is I hear it's permanent and I hear I only have to do it once and then I'm done. Well, the short answer is that's possibly true depending on what the problem is. If you've got a scar and we transplant hairs into it and you get enough growth to be happy with it, it's a one-stop and you don't have to do any therapy. But if you have any condition that has the potential to have progression in future life, it's not as simple as a one-stop therapy, and using the other medications to stop the hair loss so that you can just use the transplant, it makes a lot of sense. When I started in the field, I'm giving you a secret as to my age here, there were no therapies. So people lost hair, we gave them hair. They lost some more, we gave them some more. They lost some more, we gave them some more. We were constantly chasing it until we ran out of hairs, because here's the other critical thing we haven't mentioned.
Yes, that's the thing.
The hairs that we take from the back don't regrow on the back because they're taken lock, stock and barrel from the back and transplanted to the front. So every hair you gain on the front, you've lost from the back. So there is a limit to how much can be taken. And the skill is not just the ability to get the hair to grow on the front, but the skill is to work out artistically how much you can take from the back, not denuding the back of the hair to make the top thicker. So it's a very complicated process. It requires both technical skill and artistic planning. And we'll get into that planning, surgical part of the hair transplantation because it's a very big topic and we'll break it down into multiple things. But the take-home message is modern hair transplanting uses follicular units. So when you talk about different transplants, if you see FU at the start of any technique they're talking about, that stands for follicular unit. So what it's telling you is the graft is a follicular unit graft. So all modern types of hair transplantation use natural groupings.
It should look natural.
And therefore, if they're done properly, they are undetectable.
Absolutely. Well, I hope you find that useful. That sort of hopefully that sort of highlights where hair transplant fits in the whole sort of ecosystem of hair loss. and we will come back to this, and this will be an ongoing thing. We'll unpack the other various aspects, the donor and the recipient area, the techniques, and we'll go through that one by one in different podcasts. But yeah, that's great, and we'll see you on the next episode then.
And we'll see you on the next episode. Goodbye for now.
Thanks very much.